And business and climate change, that is what this afternoon is about. And we have seen a major shift indeed in the attitude of companies from not doing anything to actually getting very interested in climate change. And not only in the opportunities, but you also see a lot of insurance companies now more and more paying attention to climate change, because there's a lot of risk that is building up in our atmosphere today, and that is going to cause a lot of damage. It is already causing a whole lot more damage now than it did 10 years ago, but it is exponentially going up very, very quickly. So there's a lot of insurance companies that are very concerned about climate change. And you see that, and they're entering the debate. And they're the ones that are calling for regulations right now. Now, I see a lot of young people here in the room, and I think there's a question that you need to keep in the back of your mind is, what kind of job will I have, 5, 10, 20 years from now? Is that a green-collar job, or is that a job from the old economy? And I think if we put regulations in place that will force companies to change their behavior, there will be a lot of new jobs that will be created. EU emissions trading scheme, already said a few things about it. First phase started in 2005, was a bit of a tryout phase. Second phase started in January this year. Now, interestingly, there's a major learning process that is going on with the EU emissions trading scheme. It's the biggest scheme in the world for any kind of emissions trading. They have emissions trading in the United States for SO2, for example, for volatile kind of compounds, for smog credits, etc. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the United States, but the biggest one, the big daddy of emissions trading, is the EU emissions trading scheme. There's a lot of learning that needs to be done here. And one major issue that has been going through this learning phase is, how do we allocate allowances? Historically, or in the first phase, what we've done, or what the EU has done, is simply allocating allowances based on historical emissions. So if your emissions was, let's say, 100, they would give you 102. Hey, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. So your emissions were, and you would give you 102. So what they did was they gave more allowances than companies needed. Now, I'll tell you, economics 101, what happens if the supply is larger than demand? Then prices will go down to 0. Thank you very much, yes. And that's exactly what happened with the EU emissions trading scheme. So learning by doing, sure, but it has actually come at a great expense. So the lesson that we learned there is that we should not be grandfathering, we should not be allocating these allowances based on historical emissions just for free. Instead, what we should be doing is auctioning the allowances. So basically the government says, all right, everybody, you now have to pay for your emissions. And there's a good economic reason why that should be, because CO2 is the biggest externality that has ever existed in the history of mankind. What are the corporate responses to the EU emissions trading scheme? Well, it's quite simple. Most companies are compliance-oriented. They just want to solve their problem. They don't necessarily see this as an opportunity. And that is very unfortunate. The whole idea behind emissions trading is that, okay, you look at the allowance price. If I can reduce my emissions more than I am supposed to, for example, by investing in a new clean technology, etc., I free up allowances, which I can sell again to finance that, my investment in that in energy efficiency or whatever clean technology. Well, you do see though that the actual response by European companies to this problem is very, very modest and usually oriented on compliance. Financial gain, well, one of the reasons why I am standing here is because I work for a bank. A lot of banks are involved in carbon trading for two reasons. They trade, they buy and sell. If they think they can make a profit by doing so, that's a good thing. And I think it is very important to have banks involved, and not because it pays my salary, but you need to have liquidity in a market to get good price discovery. Now, I know that maybe sounds, but if there's trading every day and it's responding to fundamentals like the oil price, the gas price, the coal price, and actual economic growth, etc., new growth figures coming out, that has immediate impact on the price of allowances. So we need banks, we need traders to provide liquidity. Another reason why banks are involved is because we have a lot of clients that are looking for safe trading partners. Now, banks still are, perhaps, safe trading partners, unless you traded with Lehman Brothers, which we did, and lost some money. But overall, banks are still, fairly stable entities, and you can buy and sell, with them as a counterparty, and go to bed just nice and quietly. I already talked about the allocation. First thing you do when you hear your allocation, you go to The Hague and you ask for more. So I think the overall impact of the EU emissions trading scheme, and let's be very honest about it, it hasn't been a lot. We need a lot more drastic cuts in CO2 emissions, and I think emissions trading and the EU emissions trading still has to prove itself that it is a viable tool, to achieve this. The alternative is that we have a carbon tax. And I think there's more and more companies and politicians that are now starting to ask, well, perhaps a carbon tax isn't such a bad idea. So what are some of the lessons learned from the European emissions trading scheme? Well, very quickly, free allocation of allowances is not a good thing, it's a bad thing. I'm not in favor of it, and I'm a banker. So I'm pro-business. I want businesses, to flourish. I think I'm a capitalist. Buy, sell, But if you allocate allowances for free to companies and give them a little more than they need, that's not going to work. What we've seen with the electricity industry is actually quite interesting. The electricity industry received the allowances for free, but they will pass through the cost, the opportunity cost, for the economists among you, they will pass through the cost of the allowances into whatever they're selling, in this case electricity. So the price of electricity actually went up by the amount of emissions that it was generated with, because an electricity company, has the opportunity to decide, well, I have an allowance here, it represents a value, I can either use it for generating electricity and sell my electricity, or I can buy electricity and sell my allowances. So that's when you get this sort of perverse incentive of windfall profits. And I can tell you that there's a whole lot of utilities in Europe that were very, very happy with the EU emissions trading scheme. Did it lead to a reduction in CO2? No. Was it a big subsidy to these kinds of companies? Yes, absolutely. So, will we have a successor to the Kyoto Protocol being put in place? That successor. I'm very skeptical at this moment. I don't see it happening right now. And actually, I read an article today that Ivo de Boer, who's the Secretary General of the United Nations Climate Secretariat, said that that the speed of negotiations is just so slow that he is not sure at this moment whether Copenhagen next year will be a success. I mean, these negotiations take so awfully long. We're talking 1988, 20 years ago, when we already started to be fully aware of the consequences of climate change, and still, the Kyoto Protocol did not enter into force. The 1997 Kyoto Protocol, so it took 10 years to negotiate it, and then it took another 7 years for it to enter into force in 2005. So, these negotiations take just awfully long. And yet, we cannot expect businesses and individuals to act up and start doing something about climate change if there isn't that legislative, pressure on these. If we don't start changing our tax code, for example, we need a greening of our taxes, we need regulation, we need emissions trading, we need to create certainty for companies to scale up their investments in these clean technologies. And right now, as it stands, the Kyoto Protocol and the successor to that, the EU emissions trading scheme, I am not sure if that is actually achieving the desired goals.